Jeff, thanks. It's my second time up here today. For those of you who didn't hear my welcome to Back to School Day intro this morning, I'll do it again. Welcome to Back to School Day. It is a perfect time to be talking about these issues, not only because our kids are back in school and are focused on, wow, how can we help our own kids, our community's kids, our country's kids succeed in this challenging and changing world. So perfect time to do this. We're starting this session a little bit late. We have such a great panel and a special guest speaker. I'm going to ask for some Yom Kippur forgiveness if we run over a little bit, but I'll try to keep everyone on time. What we're going to do is I'm going to introduce my friend and colleague and acting chair, Mignon Clyburn from the FCC, and she has agreed to give some remarks to this group about these issues. And then we'll ask the panelists to come up. I'll introduce them briefly, and we'll jump into a discussion. Boy, we're so lucky to have Mignon Clyburn here. I am lucky to have had the privilege to serve side by side with Mignon Clyburn at the FCC for 4 years. It truly was one of the most fortunate things to happen to me, because your colleagues at a place like the FCC, like any job, really matter. And Mignon Clyburn was just a fantastic colleague every day for 4 years. When we agreed on things, she was a great colleague. And when we disagreed on things, she was a great colleague. And together, well, I'll put it this way, without you, Mignon, we couldn't have made the FCC work as well as it did during that period. So thank you for that. No surprise to me that Mignon Clyburn is doing such a fantastic job as acting chair now of the FCC. I'm not the only one who's lucky to have Mignon Clyburn at the FCC. The country is lucky to have someone, to have Mignon at the FCC with her background, experience, commitment, conviction. As a commissioner, Mignon distinguished herself through her work to deliver the National Broadband Plan and help the FCC focus on the opportunities and challenges of broadband, to specifically to modernize universal service, to focus on competition. And Mignon was such a powerful champion, and still is, for opportunity for all Americans, and doing what we need to do to think about students, families, communities, and help give everyone a real chance in the 21st century. As acting chairwoman, Mignon has not slowed down, and it's been not a surprise, but really praiseworthy that Mignon has taken on hard issues, even in this period as acting chair, tackling tough topics like prison payphone rates with strength and conviction and getting it done. And of course, I'd particularly like to congratulate Mignon Clyburn on launching the FCC E-rate initiative in July. The president announced his initiative in July, the Connect Ed initiative that you've heard so much about today. And Mignon Clyburn ensured that the FCC moved quickly to tee this up for a public discussion, issuing a very thorough, comprehensive, strong notice of proposed rulemaking in July. Mignon, I'm sure, won't get into the details of how the FCC works, but it's worth a minute on this. The way the FCC works is that it proposes something, it takes public input and comment, and then it decides. And so thanks to Mignon Clyburn's work, the FCC is in this period now of having proposed to act to meet the goal of connecting every student to super high-speed broadband. And it's taking input from the public. And everything that's happening today will be part of that input. And all of you should take seriously this moment to help the FCC do the right thing to ensure that we help our kids get all the benefits of digital learning in the 21st century. So Mignon, thank you for all that you've done. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule today to come here. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Chair Mignon Clyburn.
Good morning, everyone. I am from the Deep South, so I'm going to try this again. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. All right, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Julius, for that very generous introduction. I had to pinch myself because for a few moments I couldn't figure out who you were speaking about. Like he talked about the good times, and when the times were good, they were good. When we didn't agree on things, I think he might have revised things a little bit. Anyway, I'm not sure. But seriously, clearly, a summer away from the commission who agrees with you, Julius. You look a bit younger. And as someone just told me, I just look. It's been a tough summer. Anyway, I am proud of what we were able to accomplish together, Julius, and the initiatives that I plan to speak about today build on the foundation you laid during your chairmanship, so I thank you so much. To the organizers, Annenberg Retreat at Sunnylands, Common Sense Media, the Lead Commission, and New Schools Venture Fund, thank you so much for enabling us to highlight such a pivotal moment for our schools, for industry stakeholders, for the future of education, for all of us. As you heard during the morning sessions, and as many of you know from your personal experiences, technology has the power to revolutionize education in America. But this conference is being held because we all recognize that we are not where we need to be on digital learning, both relative to other nations and to the rate of technology adoption in other sectors of our society. One of the biggest obstacles to seizing these opportunities is an adequate bandwidth at our schools and at our libraries. Simply put, our schools need faster, high-capacity connections, and they need them now. This summer, when we launched the modernization of E-Rate, the FCC took an important step towards ensuring that our schools and libraries have the tools they need to support modern digital learning. E-Rate is one of the FCC's and America's biggest success stories. Back in 1996, when less than 1% of the world's population was online, leaders at the White House, the FCC, and in Congress recognized that the internet was a game changer and that schools and libraries could serve as an on-ramp for nascent information superhighway. As part of the Telecommunications Act of 1996, a bipartisan coalition of senators led by Jay Rockefeller and Olympia Snowe, as well as then Representative Ed Markey, established E-Rate to ensure that kids in all areas of this nation, including rural areas, could get access to the internet and advanced communication services. As a result of E-Rate, nearly every U.S. library and school is connected to the internet. For just one example of its impact, allow me to speak about Loris Elementary, of course, in my home state of South Carolina. Loris is a town of about 2,400 people, almost half of whom live in poverty. But the elementary school is using technology to help children rise above their circumstances. Every student in grades 3 through 5 has been assigned a laptop loaded with learning software. Teachers are using digital tools to assess each student's progress in real time and offer differentiated instruction to meet each student's individual needs. Now test scores are up, and in state ranking of similar schools, Loris Elementary rose from 41st into the top 20. Places like Loris Elementary remind us that broadband has the potential to be the great equalizer for our children. It doesn't matter whether you live in a rural area where I call home, or in a wealthy urban community where sometimes I like to be. Connecting a child to the internet links them to cutting-edge instruction and new learning opportunities. Our goal should be to make this the rule and not the exception. We also need to ensure similar advances for libraries. These reference centers are key pieces to the overall education picture because they support kindergarten through 12th grade students after school hours with online research resources, interactive online homework help, and digital learning labs. They also support homeschooled students, distant learners, GED preparation and test taking, job training, and other lifelong learning opportunities. And so while E-rate has been a success, it needs to be modernized to ensure that all schools and libraries have the capacity they need. As educators increasingly integrate digital content into their lesson plans, faster speed and additional capacity to within schools are needed to accommodate all of today's and tomorrow's interactive digital learning. Although some schools have sufficient capacity to implement digital learning tools and strategies, too many do not. In fact, in the 2010 FCC survey of schools and libraries in the districts, nearly half of respondents reported lower speed internet connectivity than the average American home. Similarly, 41% of libraries reported that their connectivity was inadequate, and fewer than 10% of America's libraries offer internet speeds of 100 megabits or faster. This is simply not good enough. We must do better for the nation's children and its citizens. We must ensure that our young people, teachers, and the millions of citizens that use libraries every year have access to the tools they need to compete and succeed in the digital age. The U.S. will fall far behind in the 21st century economy if our classrooms don't evolve beyond a 19th century model. So this summer, when President Obama went to Mooresville High School in North Carolina and issued a call for action to close our education system's bandwidth deficit, Superintendent Mark Edwards, who I believe is here and was on the preceding panel, was there. So you know why the president visited this school, to highlight the benefits of greater network capacity. And while in North Carolina, the president announced his Connect Ed initiative and called upon the FCC to bring high-speed internet to 99% of U.S. students within 5 years. The FCC needs to modernize E-rate and to answer the president's call. So we need to roll up our sleeves and do what it takes to ensure that our nation's schools and libraries have the broadband connections needed to meet their current and future requirements. The E-rate rulemaking we launched in July is a critical first step. Our key goals are clear: connecting every student in America by ensuring affordable access for schools and libraries to high-capacity broadband, maximizing the cost effectiveness of purchases, and ensuring the administrative efficiency of E-rate. What's not clear, however, is how to achieve these goals. That's why we are trying to answer with our proceeding. That is what we're trying to answer in our proceeding, and that is where we desperately need your help. Good data drives good policy, and I'll be blunt. We need good data if we're going to get this right. We need good data when it comes to the bandwidth schools need for today's and tomorrow's digital learning tools. We need good data to understand how to cut costs, increase efficiencies, streamline the program, and to deliver that broadband capacity to and within schools in the most effective manner. Resources are not unlimited, and we have a responsibility to be careful stewards of public resources. So we need to ensure that we are getting the most bang for our E-rate buck. We need to ensure that we're connecting as many children as possible, that we are leveraging consortium and other bulk buying opportunities, that we phase out funding for unnecessary services, and that we streamline and improve the administration of this program. We need you to help us come up with these answers. And by you, I am not just talking about those who have participated in previous E-rate proceedings. I am talking also about innovators from Silicon Valley, researchers, businesses, community leaders, and other stakeholders who may not receive E-rate funding, but who have valuable information that will help the Commission ensure that all of America's children will be prepared with the skills to enter and contribute to the digital economy. Comments are due next week, with reply comments following next month. So I strongly encourage all of you to weigh in. For maximizing participation in the FCC's proceeding will help us maximize the benefits of our E-rate investments. So I thank you all for being a part of today's conference, as well as this effort. By working together, we will realize the promise of technology to improve U.S. education and expand opportunity for future generations. So let's get to work. Thank you very much.
So again, thank you, Commissioner Clyburn, for joining us today. As you'll see, we have a great panel here now, which is good because we have a great audience here today. For those of you who only...
And a great moderator.
We have an okay... Thank you, David. I appreciate it. But there's so many people who are here now, have been here throughout the day. Let me acknowledge some of them. Jim Coulter and the folks from the LEAD Commission who've done so much work in moving this forward. Joel Klein, everyone knows Joel has been here today. Mark Edwards from Mooresville. Jim Shelton, the Deputy Education Secretary. Congressman Delaney is helping. April Delaney is helping, which might even be more important, knowing John, and for all of you know April, Jim Steyer. So thank you all. I'm going to very briefly introduce the members of the panel and then ask a question that I'll ask each of the panelists to address for a couple of minutes, and then we'll continue with the discussion from there. So we have John Bailey here today. John is the Executive Director of Digital Learning Now. I've gotten a chance to work with John on the Aspen Institute Digital Learning Task Force, which is co-chaired by Jeb Bush and Rosaria Dawson. The people are breaking down the doors to get on this task force. John is, of course, the person who's actually doing the work on the task force. And so, John, thank you. John previously served as a special assistant to the president for domestic policy during the Bush administration, where he coordinated education and labor policy. He's also worked at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, served as an advisor so far to 3 presidential campaigns. David Cohen, proceeding alphabetically, is the executive vice president of Comcast, which only understates his role as part of the leadership team at Comcast NBC Universal. David has led many big and important initiatives at Comcast, too many to list, but these include the very important Internet Essentials programming, which is helping kids and families with kids on school lunch programs get low-cost access to broadband at home. David has deep background and knowledge on these issues. David, thank you for joining us. Janet Davis is here from Verizon Wireless, where Janet leads a team responsible for education strategy and sales support. Janet has the important and tough job of driving the overall education community for Verizon Wireless to the right communications infrastructure and increasing mobility to enable anywhere learning. Evan Marwell is here, the CEO and co-founder of EducationSuperHighway, which is a nonprofit dedicated to ensuring that every K-12 school has reliable, high-capacity internet access so that they can realize the promise of digital learning. Evan has an extraordinary career, impossible to summarize. I'll just say that he's been a successful serial entrepreneur, starting companies in telecom, software, consumer retailing, and even a hedge fund. Rob Shanahan is here, the president and CEO of Lightower Fiber Networks, where he's been since 2008. Lightower, Rob has led it from a small dark fiber provider to a full-service metro fiber powerhouse. Prior to Lighthouse, Rob co-founded Conversant Communications and has also an extraordinary background in this area. So thank you all for joining us. Let me do this, and I'm just going to ask you each the same question and take a couple of minutes to talk. But as part of your opening comments, I'd like you each to address this. What is it about the opportunities of digital learning, of technology and education, that excites you, that inspires you, that caused you to say yes to this invitation to come here today? What do you see here that's motivating you? And John, maybe you could address that and any
Sure.
other opening remarks that you have.
No, great, thanks. It's great to be here. This is one of the more substantive discussions that I think we've seen about digital learning and the role of connectivity. I think that's what excites me so much. Is I think Gene Sperling hit it the nail on the head this morning, that this really is one of the very few bipartisan issues out there. A lot of the work that we do, that Governor Bush does, is working with state policymakers all across the country, and Democrats, Republicans, Independents. There is just a consensus that digital learning is going to transform education. And I think what's exciting about that is transforming it in sort of two different ways. One, it is helping to accelerate the role of education in terms of addressing equity issues. And you heard a lot about this, I think, on the panels today, from content to scaling interventions to taking some of our best teachers and making them accessible, the Khan Academy and what they're doing. It is a way for us to fulfill an equity mission in a way that we could never do so before. The second, I think, is around innovation. This is a catalyst for innovation. That every time I'm going out to Silicon Valley, more and more, you're seeing a couple different things. One, the barriers to starting a company, a solution provider, are sort of rapidly lowering. And as a result, when I go to incubators like Imagine K-12, we're seeing teachers, we're seeing parents, we're seeing administrators that were in the classroom that now all of a sudden are becoming education entrepreneurs and tackling problems and delivering solutions. But the only way you could do that is if you scale them over connectivity, over broadband connectivity. And I think that's kind of the thing that excites us so much about what's going on right now with the E-rate reform and about this whole notion of connected learning, is that it's enabling very new models of learning that we could never have done beforehand. Whether it's competency-based learning, online learning, blended learning, which you heard a lot about today, all those are dependent on connectivity and having really robust high-speed broadband.
Great. Thank you. Let's see.
Great. Well, we're obviously in the connectivity business. We have about 20,000 route miles of fiber stretching from Maine through Virginia. A lot of metro fiber, which allows us to connect to schools and libraries and municipalities. Half of our business is selling to carriers who then resell to other end user customers, including wireless carriers. And the other half is enterprise and schools. So what's exciting for us is to be able to teach people how to use technology. And whether it's an enterprise customer that can operate their business more efficiently using the technology, to get a leg up on competition, to expand their business, or to schools, K through 12, which is a big piece of our business, higher ed, research and education networks. We have about 90 schools and libraries connected to our network. And the applications range from a simple IP connection, where the service is used for email or basic software needs, cloud access, to more sophisticated applications such as wide area networks for districts that might use the leverage the network to provide some video distance learning. In remote areas in the Hudson Valley, where we have a lot of schools and libraries, the Dutchess County BOCES or southwestern Westchester County BOCES use the network to provide core curriculum in remote areas that may not justify a resource in some of these remote areas. Or the sharing of resources, a behaviorist or a school psychologist that through the video can evaluate and assess a child in the classroom through the video, as opposed to having to drive from school to school or have a resource in a remote market that, or school that might not justify it. So that's exciting for us as a father of two elementary school kids. You know, it's exciting to think about the future as they go through school, having access to R&D networks, supercomputing facilities, maybe foreign exchange programs using the video technology. So it's exciting for us to, you know, we're obviously in a for-profit business to expand our network and our customer base, but, you know, it's exciting to see what we can do with our network to help schools leverage technology and expand education through technology.
Great. Thank you, Janet.
Well, thank you all for allowing us to be here. As I've heard today, we're bringing together all the different pieces and components that really are exciting and are really need to be recognized as what schools need to be thinking about. So many times we go out and we say, you know, I'm in front of schools probably half the time. And the schools will say, we just don't know what to do. We don't know where to start. We don't know who to even talk to. Vendors are coming in, but nobody's really helping us understand what the project plan needs to look like. So it's exciting today to be here and to hear the different people talk about it's not just about the device, it's not just about the connectivity, it's not just about the content. It's about all the different pieces coming together and really having that teacher take the initiative to bring it to the students and make it come alive for them. And I'm the mother of two as well, and it's as you look at your children and you see the excitement they have when they're watching YouTube or they're playing Clash of Clans, I can name all of them. But the reality is they want to learn in a different fashion. They want to learn in a different method. They want to be able to take themselves to a new level. But yet we have to realize that they still need the discipline and they need to be able to understand that there's certain things they need to learn along the way. So today, I'm excited to hear all that, and I'm excited to represent a company that not only recognizes education as a pillar and through our foundation, but also down to our salespeople and what we're doing there and how we're bringing it to life. So not only from our wireline side of the house, but also our wireless side. And I encourage people that as we're looking at this and as we're talking about the infrastructure, that we really look at it holistically and not just look at it as fiber or wireless or 4G or 3G or Wi-Fi. We need to look at this if we're going to talk about anytime, anywhere learning, which is ultimately what we want to get to. We need to look at all of the pieces and how those come together.
Okay, thank you. David.
So on a personal level and to some extent a corporate level, I think what's exciting about this conversation is the intersection of two passions, education and technology. And I think one of the reasons why this is not a partisan issue is because there isn't any partisan disagreement about the importance of educational improvements and educational quality, and the use of education is the ultimate leveler of the playing field. I think everyone can agree with that, and technology can be a huge enhancer of that particular policy objective. Now, one of my strengths, and some would argue one of my weaknesses, is that I am a harshly pragmatic and practical person. And so I urge myself, my team, and I urge all of us as we think about this to keep our eye on the ball of what the goal here is, which is enhancing educational outcomes. That's the ultimate practical result that we're looking for. And as I think about that, just a couple of quick comments at the outset that I think is important. The first, with respect to E-rate and Connect ED, huge policy goal, laudable policy goal. But let's focus. If we focus on improving educational outcomes, let's not get caught up on sort of catchphrases and things of let's get 1 gig of speed to schools. I have no idea whether 1 gig to schools is right. I don't know if it's enough. I don't know if it's too much. I think the practical reality is to ask the question, and Acting Chair Clyburn raised this point, of what speed do we need in classrooms to be able to enhance educational outcomes for students? And then you can reverse engineer from that conclusion to the capacity that you need to deliver to schools. So there's one practical implication of focusing on educational outcomes. Similarly, when you focus on the practicality, I think one of the harshest practical realities of the existing E-rate program is that there are two aspects to delivering broadband connectivity to students. One is getting the connectivity to the school, and the other is dispersing the connectivity once it's at the school within the classrooms. And let's face it, we have an E-rate program right now that focuses and incentivizes connections to schools, but is not very good in incentivizing and funding dispersal of connections once you get the connection to the schools. So if we're focused on the practical result here of enhancing educational outcomes, we're going to need to change the focus of the E-rate program to make sure that there is at least equal attention on dispersal of connectivity, whatever that required connectivity is, from the outside wall of the school to the individual classrooms within the school. And then my third comment, which, and Chairman referenced this, and forgive this, but if, remember all the political ads, when you say, when you wake the presidential candidate up at 3 o'clock in the morning, You know, when say, oh, the Iranians have armed their nuclear weapons, what should we do? When you wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and the fault of this, by the way, aside from my own neuroses, really rests with our moderator, because he's the one who started me thinking about this. But when you wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, what's the most important thing that you, David Cohen, can do, that Comcast can do, that we, as focused on technology, can do, I'm always going to answer broadband connectivity at the home. So we got 38% of Americans don't have broadband connectivity at home, and I don't care if you deliver 1 gig of speed to every classroom in the United States in the next 3 years. If 30% of our kids don't have broadband connectivity at home, we are not going to enhance their educational outcomes, because every digital learning technology technique, every treatment of the child as the whole child in the whole educational system, the strength of every single one of those tools requires the kids to be able to do homework at home, envisions teachers communicating with parents, with students, and between them through broadband connectivity at home. And if we don't solve that problem while we're bringing high-speed internet access to schools, we are not going to accomplish our pragmatic goal, which is to enhance educational outcomes.
Evan. So for me, what's exciting is that as I reflect back on my life and your nice comments about my career, education is opportunity. And I had the opportunity to go to a great public school system. And what excites me about technology and connectivity is that it's the chance for every kid to have the opportunity to get a great education, whether they're in a large urban district or a small remote town. And what I wanted to do today is we get emails all the time in our work from teachers. And so I thought I'd read you one that I just got the other day. So this is a teacher from a small town in Vermont named Miss Blanco. And she's a design and visual communications teacher. And she says, one of my jobs is to open the world to these kids so that they see themselves and each other in a context greater than this tiny community, 800 kids. However, gas prices and limited access to buses and vans makes this difficult. Skype looked like it was going to be the godsend. We hooked up with another larger technical high school in Vermont to collaborate on a couple of projects and share learning experiences. It was going to be a test run of our technology. I hope that once we ironed out the kinks of the project, we could reach out to larger urban areas in other states and perhaps other countries. However, even with just 6 kids Skyping, the bandwidth was so compromised that nothing worked. The projects I had planned to develop collaboratively with kids from other parts of the state, country, and planet have been scrapped until I can get download and upload data transfer faster than 2 megabits. Until then, my students will learn design and communication from the limited context of the town of 800 that they come from. So to me, this is what this is all about, right? This is about solving that problem. This is about solving the problem of kids who don't have access at home. And for us, we're Education Superhighway. We're a nonprofit, as you mentioned. We're really the data guys, right? So we're the folks who are trying to bring data and business thinking to this problem. And so I thought one of the things I would do to sort of set up the panel a little bit is share a few slides of what the reality is out there today. So this first slide is just who's ready for digital learning. We've heard a lot of things. We've been running something called the National School Speed Test. We've collected almost 1 million data points from around the country. And basically what it shows is if you look at CETA's, Doug Levin's organization's standards, only 23% of our schools today have the bandwidth that they need for digital learning. And if you look out to 2017, less than 1%. Okay, so we have a very large challenge ahead of us. And as David was saying, it's not just about the connectivity, but it's also about the Wi-Fi infrastructure inside the schools. So we've got to solve both of those. Second piece of context, E-rate is going to be massively oversubscribed beyond where it is today just for connectivity if we continue business as usual. Today, there's about 2.5 terabits of bandwidth being used around the country, and we're going to try to get to 55 terabits in the next 4 or 5 years if we meet the CETA standards. If you look at what we're spending today on WAN infrastructure, on internet access, it's about $1.4 billion of the E-rate fund. That's going to have to grow to $10 billion if we continue business as usual. So I think, again, to frame this, if we continue to do things the way we've always done things, we are going to have to make a choice. Do we add lots of money, or do we not give schools and kids the bandwidth they need? Only if we continue to do things the way we've always done them. One of the things I think it's important to understand, so the data network is about 60% of the spending. So one of the options that people are talking about, that all of the commissioners have talked about as they've talked about E-rate reform, is what do we do with that other 40% of spending? Should we deprioritize it? Should we think about how we allocate more of that to the data networks? I think a very important question on the table. But also I think we need to understand that even within the data, most of the money is actually not the internet access from the district office out to the internet, but in the WAN infrastructure, connecting each of the schools to the district office. And that's actually really good news. And the reason that's good news is the following, which is that if you connect all of our schools, if we make the investment that the president's talking about, if we do the kinds of things we can do, we have an amazing opportunity to drive pricing from a median today in the E-rate program of $40 per megabit per month, or in cases of schools that are doing a really good job, $6, $5 per month, down to less than a quarter, less than a dime. And the way we do that is we do that by moving from paying per megabit to paying per connection. And what E-rate can do is facilitate that change. And if we do this, we can essentially take advantage of the fact that WAN connections are essentially fixed costs. You put it in, and it doesn't matter if you're giving 10 megabits or 10 gigabits. It's basically the same operating cost. And to do that, we can meet the goals and eliminate the need to actually dramatically increase to $10 billion the E-rate program. So that's some context that I think might be helpful for our discussion today.
Well, that's great. Let's use that as a jumping off point. I think this is really useful information for the FCC as it thinks about reforming the program. So let's spend the first part of the session on what do we want the FCC to know about what will really matter. Are there any, let me just ask the panel in general, are there any other ideas on sort of concrete areas the FCC should look at to shift from business as usual around E-rate to a new model that closes this very challenging gap that Evan described? Rob, maybe I'll start with you, because I know I think you've been you're sort of in the guts of E-rate funding. Any thoughts from you?
Right. Well, we think the process should be streamlined and simplified. It's a complicated process, particularly for smaller schools that don't have the resources to get through the paperwork and the rules and the process. We also think that schools should have the ability, the flexibility to choose a technology that works best for their individual needs. It's not a one solution fits all. It's not a cookie cutter. It depends by the needs are different. So having flexibility. We also think that there needs to be the program needs to take a longer view. For schools to have to reapply for funding every 12 months, it's tough to build a significant network if you're reapplying every 12 months for funding. And if we look at, in the private sector, they'll buy network and connectivity and equipment with a longer term view, usually signing up for a 3 to 5 year or longer term, where the provider can get a return on the investment they make to deliver the service. And the buyer has the stability, has the technology in place, and hopefully it's a future-proof technology that they're buying, a scalable technology that they're buying that will scale up as the needs change. We don't know if it's going to be 1 gig or 10 gig. I can guarantee it's going to be a lot more than 1 gig real quick, the way we see the consumption of bandwidth.
Yes, one of the things that we've seen is that different schools seem to be paying different prices for the same product. Is there anything that the FCC can do, or that others can do, to help address that. I'll add one other fact to that. I think there are about 150,000 schools that are buying broadband in and around E-rate. Maybe that's schools plus libraries, but it's a big number. If you think about it together, it's one of the larger enterprise broadband customers in the U.S. Are there things to do to drive efficiency around that so that more money can go to close this gap? David, do you have any thoughts on
So
that?
here, it's interesting. I agree with the observation. Be interesting in what the data actually showed, but I suspect it'll confirm the observation. I'm not sure, however, that the cost is being driven as much by the inefficiency of the purchase as it is, and really building on a point Janet made about the uneducated nature in which so many schools and school districts go about the purchase decision. It's really, I hate to say this, but it is really a consultant-driven process and depends on the quality of the consultant and what the consultant tells you to buy, and what the expertise is at the purchasing end, than it is around any type of a collective bargaining position, to be perfectly candid. So one of the concepts that we've been discussing internally, and it's interesting because I think it feeds into comments that a number of people done, is whether it is possible to design, and I don't want to be too glib about this, and I recognize all the hazards with it, and I'm not proposing that there should be a one-size-fits-all approach to this, but whether the commission could devise an almost TurboTax-like online template for how you would construct, how you would go through the analysis of what bandwidth you need, how you would go and backwards engineer that to the capacity, and what your options would be and how you would design an in-school network, and what your options would be on a local base, on a school-by-school basis for purchase and for competitive bidding around that, to sort of take some of the consultant control, if you will, out of this process, and to have a much more educated and supported purchasing decision that is going into the RFPs, the individual RFPs that school districts and schools are putting out on the street to be able to accomplish their needs. And it helps guides, that process would have the benefit of helping to guide the schools and the school districts through the thought process that they should be undertaking to designing their networks. And again, I love consultants. Some of my best friends are consultants, but the one thing we all know is that the consultants may not share the agenda of enhancing education outcomes and of connecting technology to education. There's a totally different incentive structure on a consultant-driven process than there would be from an educational-driven process.
It's such an important point, right? We're shifting from a world in which the model, I think you may have said this, David, or others on the panel, of a computer in every classroom to a device like this in the hands of every student that's available to them both at school and at home. It's all happening so quickly. John, let me ask you what you spend a lot of time with schools. How do we help schools have the capacity to do this kind of technology planning? I think David's suggestion was maybe at some level we need to identify somehow, either at the FCC or otherwise, some kind of central themes that are similar across all schools. Maybe use the internet to make information available to schools and say, all right, if you have a school of this size and this kind of community, here are a couple of templates for what you need. But what have you seen, John?
So I actually agree a lot with what has been talked about, because I think this is there's two sides to this coin. There's the program design, simplifying it, streamlining it. I think multi-year contracts makes a lot of sense, and encouraging consortia purchasing, aggregating demand to help sort of lower costs and sort of justify sort of build-out costs for providers. I think all those are sort of good reforms. I do think there is a capacity issue at schools. I think there are, the E-rate originally required technology plans, and that's been helpful. Except that technology plans in some degrees have become sort of compliance plans. It's become more of an acquisition plan. Here are the things we want to buy. as opposed to kind of the type of transformation I think we've seen from Mark Edwards and other schools out there like Rocket Ship Education, Carpe Diem, just there's a whole list of those. There's a difference between having a technology plan and sort of leading a transition, a conversion, if you will. And I think there's huge challenges with, I've met a lot of superintendents who know they want the connectivity, they just don't have the language and the vernacular to describe it. And so often they fall back on, and I've seen this all the way back to E-rate 1.0, but back in the 90s when I was in Pennsylvania, we had school districts that sort of asked for fiber, not because they wanted fiber, they wanted the speed that they associated with fiber. But by sort of asking it in a very sort of technology-specific language, it precluded a whole range of other types of potential technologies that could be delivered that speed and that sort of experience that they want to provide their kids. So I do think this idea of sort of equipping decision makers and procurement officers with sort of information, giving them templates and usage scenarios. If you have this many kids and you're doing this type of blended learning model or this much content, or if you're using Reading Rainbow, here's the types of bandwidth speeds that you need. And here's how to describe that in a way that's a technology neutral way, as opposed to locking yourself in a solution that there may not be solution providers in your community for that.
Evan, I know you wanted to, go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess I fully support, and a lot of our work's been around creating reference designs, giving people guidance templates. There's absolutely both a technical and a procurement expertise deficit in districts. But the one thing I will say is networking is something that you should be aggregating, right? Not just for purchasing, but for expertise. So it makes no sense for every school district in this country to have a networking expert responsible for their networks. What we should be doing is aggregating that expertise up. So if you look at what Jeff Ma, who's going to speak later today, has done in Maine, he has a small group of people that manage the networks for every school and library in Maine. I mean, that's, if you look at Verizon, you look at Comcast, they don't have a network operations center in every little town that they have a network. They've got big NOCs, a couple of them around the country. And that's what we should be doing here, both for the build out, to get the expertise to build these networks out, but also for the ongoing monitoring and management of the networks.
And Jen, I think you sort of started this topic of helping schools wrestle with the new technologies. Do you have any concrete suggestions on things that either the FCC can do or schools can do to respond to your own point?
Well, I think we need to look at what should the goal be. So, much like you said, I think schools are wrestling with, if you look out there, we need 10 gigabit, we need 100 gigabit, we need this, we need that. I don't think they know. So if we had the data to put goals out there and say, this is what the bandwidth goal you should be attaining to at all of your schools. So maybe at high school, it's a bigger bandwidth. At middle school, it's a different bandwidth. At elementary, it's a different bandwidth. Help those schools understand what that goal should be, and help the program understand the data that we should be collecting to see if those schools are attaining those goals. Because right now, I think we have schools that are, for example, saying we're going to plan for our bandwidth for 3 devices per student. And you have other schools that are saying, wow, I can't even plan for 1 device per student. And then you have schools that are out there saying, we're going to do this blended model, but we don't even know how to get that done, or what you read about the teacher in Vermont. Really, it's sad that the teacher can't even do the collaboration with another school because she doesn't have the bandwidth. So I think to help the schools along, we need to give them what that bandwidth should be, the minimum, and look at that and say, this is the goal you should attain to. This is how long it should take you to get there. And this is what that is. And then as we go through the program, really look at what schools are making it, what schools aren't making it. Is it a rural issue? Is it an urban issue? Is it a suburban issue? Is it schools that are small? Is it schools that are medium-sized, large, mega schools? And then start looking at that data in different ways so that you can say, yes, we're being successful, or this is how we need to change the program to be able to make sure that those students are actually getting the broadband that they need.
Jen, let me ask you another question on the sort of spectrum piece of this, right?
Okay.
When E-rate got going, it really was all about wires. Some of us were around then, stringing wires into schools, and the computers got plugged into the, into the wall. And the world has changed so much now that obviously the wired infrastructure is still incredibly important. But when you think about in-school connectivity, David mentioned that, a big part of that is spectrum-based. It's Wi-Fi, right? These devices for the last yard are going to be hooked up that way. And then outside the schools, there are new opportunities around spectrum and wireless. And I wanted to ask you, because you're from Verizon Wireless, is there anything about the spectrum part of the world that the FCC and others looking at this should make sure that they understand as they think about E-rate 2.0?
Well, I think we need to make sure that the wireless providers out there have enough spectrum to be able to provide the different options. It's been talked about to be technology neutral. And I think, as we're looking at it, schools need to make the best option for them, make the best decision for them. If it's wireless, if it's fiber, they need to make the best decision. And so I think there are some options in terms of spectrum. I'm not sure giving schools spectrum is the right option. I'm not sure that that's the right thing to do, but I think it's making sure that the carriers out there have the spectrum and can build that out in such a way that we can provide the services to those schools who don't have, and more importantly, or equally as important as David has said, is allow those students who don't have broadband in their home to be able to have that service. And for children who are active, not just have it be in the home, but have them be anywhere, anytime learning. Because I think that's important.
Let me ask you, David, you wanted to say something, and I want to point out that people at one level think of Comcast as a wire company.
Right.
But how many people now are engaging with Comcast broadband through Wi-Fi in the homes or at small businesses?
Huge issue. So Janet, I wanted to vehemently agree with everything Janet said. It's interesting.
That's the first time.
No, it really isn't the first time. You really asked a question about Wi-Fi, and I think to be fair, and I'll just make the point, not as maybe as a Verizon Wireless partner, but not as Verizon Wireless, that when you talk about being technology neutral in this space, you absolutely, in addition to fiber and HFC and other technologies, you absolutely have to throw LTE into the mix, and it actually absolutely belongs there. And so while I fully support and endorse the fact that, as your question suggested, this may be a matter of spectrum policy as well as a matter of E-rate policy, the second thing that comes out of my mouth when you wake me at 3 o'clock in the morning, which is also your fault, is that when we talk about spectrum policy, we have to make sure that there are adequate carve-outs for unlicensed spectrum to support Wi-Fi. And I say that it happens in this panel, I say that because I think it is an essential element. On a technology-neutral basis, there is no doubt that there will be a vast number of schools that are using Wi-Fi for the in-school dispersal of whatever bandwidth is delivered to the school. But I say it for public safety reasons, and I say it for the reasons that you express, which is increasingly our customers are using Wi-Fi to connect to their high-speed data, to their video services, and whether it's anytime, anywhere learning, it's anytime, anywhere exposure to the internet, and this is a place where then Janet can pipe in and say that one of the most important things for our wireless carriers is the ability, quite frankly, for a lot of this utilization to be downloaded to Wi-Fi in the home and in other places, because it's the only way that the wireless networks are going to be able to have any chance of keeping up with demand. So I think spectrum policy is a really important facet of this discussion for all of those reasons.
John, go ahead.
Just so I think, in addition to the discussion around sort of spectrum policy and sort of that telecom, I do think this comes back a little bit to program design with E-rate 2.0 too, because I think there's some tension right now about the program is mainly focused on sort of buildings and a use for instructional use. And then as soon as a student moves that mobile learning device outside of a school, the school has to go through all these complicated prorating, the cost of that and what usage is outside of the school. And I think if you just take a step back and look at all the broad industry trends, what Mary Meeker, every single year that she's been doing this internet report, is talking about the explosive growth of mobile connectivity. I think if you look at the devices that are getting to schools with LA, with their iPad purchases, with Joe Klein and what he's doing with Amplify, it all hinges on a mobile learning, on connectivity that happens at the school with fiber and with Wi-Fi, but that those education models hinge on students being able to take that connectivity with them to learn on their school bus going home, at after-school centers, at libraries, at home. I think there's ways of sort of tackling this with E-rate that's sensitive in a sense of not infringing on other universal service fund programs that are geared at low-income and minority and households connectivity, but in a way that is supporting the type of learning. I'd hate for us to get all the way at the end of this E-rate process, have a reformed and expanded E-rate, but then we're locking in old models of education still that are sort of totally transforming school, but not actually transforming learning or education.
Let me do this. We're close to the end of our time, and we could spend 3 hours with this panel, and actually, I think solve a lot of the issues. But let me just ask if any of you have any other points that you'd just like to make sure we convey to this audience, to the other people who will be studying what's happening here today to inform the FCC proceeding and other activities. Open to anyone.
Just a comment on the bandwidth targets, which I think are important. I think it needs to start with identifying the applications and stacking the applications to determine what the bandwidth need is on an individual basis, and all the things we talked about here, educating the educators on how to use technology, what's available, and how it can benefit kids in the classroom and outside the classroom, I think is important. But identifying educating and identifying the applications, I think, is critical. And the bandwidth is all scalable. As long as the broadband wireless there, or the fiber, or HFC, whatever it is, it's the application layers, I think, identifying first, and how we're going to use the technology is most critical.
And I would say that one of the pieces we need to consider as we're moving forward is not just where we're at today and where we want E-rate to go in a year or 2 years, but also understanding how we're going to collect data so we know where we need to go for the future. So as we're looking at those applications, and I think that's a great point, and as you're looking at how those applications are growing, where we need to go. So we're collecting that data in a very easy fashion from schools, not having to go back and do a survey that we all know everybody rolls their eyes at, but really collecting it real time so we can slice it and dice it and chop it and know how we need to change E-rate in a very readily and easy fashion because the data supports it.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on the data point. I think data is absolutely critical to this. So whether it's collecting data about how schools are actually using their bandwidth in terms of how much of it they're using through things not too dissimilar from the Measuring Broadband America program that you guys put in place, so that the FCC has data about who's using what so that we can allocate funding to people who actually need more bandwidth as opposed to people who just ask for more bandwidth. Whether it's creating more transparency around what people are spending the E-rate funding on by making the data that schools submit today, whether it's asking vendors to actually provide, who have the best knowledge about what schools are getting, to actually report that to the FCC. I think all of those are really critical points of data and how data can inform the process and make it easier. The other thing that I'd like to add, though, is that we really do have to think about this notion of future-proofing our networks for schools. There's an opportunity to make a big investment, hopefully, with the President's initiative. We need to make sure that that investment pays dividends, not just in the next 5 years, but for a long time. And what that means is we really need to make sure that schools get the connectivity that they need, but have the ability to upgrade that connectivity and ride Moore's law down as equipment falls in prices, and you can go from 1 gigabit to 10 gigabits to 40 gigabits to 100 gigabits. We need to make sure schools are positioned to do that. And then the last thing I'll say is we should really think about this not just as an opportunity for schools and libraries, but if we use this opportunity to build out our fiber networks further, it creates opportunities for all kinds of other community anchor institutions. And in the process, we really should think hard about the historic rules around E-rate and cost allocation and things like that, so that the vendors who put that fiber in have the ability to actually use that fiber to serve other customers who need it.
Great. John,
So
go ahead. Sorry.
You're good, John.
I was going to say just 2 points. I think one, just to jump on the data bandwagon. One of the more exciting points of the lengthy NPRM for me, I think, was paragraph 43. It's the only time you'll ever hear me.
paragraph.
Yeah, it's the only time you'll ever hear me excited about an OMB memo. But talking about open data and machine-readable data, and this is the type of thing that is so easy because it's techno-Latin and just easy to put aside. But it's data like people wants to be free, and if you can get it out of these locked-in sort of formats and paper forms and get it into the hands of entrepreneurs like Evan and other folks out there, great things will happen with this. You'll have more informed schools. You'll have more informed providers that will have sort of data to be able to sort of justify the building out costs in terms of areas to identify unmet need. So I think this data thing is just crucial. Second, there is an urgency here that just cannot be, I think, overstated. From an education standpoint, so put aside the technology standpoint, all the technology conversations we've been having, the education reform debate we're having in this country now around Common Core standards, around online assessments, all of these things hinge on having robust connectivity at the school level. We cannot reach these goals of having kids college and career ready, of making sure that these Common Core assessments are delivered on time, of just general better and more rigorous and better assessments are delivered on time unless we have that connectivity. And so it is just crucial that all of you participate. You don't have to answer all 139 questions in the NPRM, but answering just a few and giving some examples of how this is going to help sort of modernize and really accelerate the reform that we're trying to put in place is going to be critical.
Great. David?
So also too, and I'll do them both quickly. The first one is, I think if you're a private business and for many of the people, certainly everyone on this panel, many people in this audience, this may be obvious, but I think as we look at reform of E-rate, we have to make sure that we encourage appropriate whole technology solutions and authorize spending on technology that can help enhance the efficiency of the networks by way of example. So, for example, caching services, which could dramatically reduce the amount of bandwidth that you might need in a school to produce the same, again, pardon my practical reality, but produce the same result in the classroom, making an upfront investment in something like caching services and having E-rate pay for that, which is totally unclear whether E-rate today, whether the E-rate program today would pay for it. It's just approaching this from the perspective of if you were a highly sophisticated business seeking to create this type of an enterprise, where would you spend your money? And we have to make sure that the E-rate program supports spending in all of those areas to make these intelligent enterprise purchases. The second, and I hate doing this, this is where the weakness of my harsh pragmatic reality, and I hate ending on a downer because you go through a whole presentation, I guess a whole discussion like we're having all day today, and you say, who in the world could be against any of this? I mean, it's the most logical, rational, bipartisan thing in the world. And there's one slide that Evan put up that gives you the answer to that question. And that is that the surest way to start taking unbelievable incoming fire from Democrats and Republicans, this will be bipartisan as well, is the notion that in order to accomplish these objectives, we need a massive multi-billion-dollar tax increase to be able to implement this program. Now, I'm not sure we do or we don't, but here's the challenge to all of us, which is once we all agree, and everyone in this room is going to agree this is an objective that is worth pursuing and it's worth taking the risk, and we all have to figure out a way to do this. We have to figure out a way to characterize this so that people don't think that there is a multi-billion-dollar tax increase involved in this program that's being, by the way, that is also being adopted independent of the legislative process, and that's one I'm still trying to get my brain around, but I think that is a harsh practical reality of the world in which we're functioning, and that will take a lot of interesting creativity by a lot of smart people, and we should all sign up for that part of the exercise too.
Well, this has been a smart, energetic, very helpful panel. I jotted down some takeaways. Let me try this, and then we'll ask everyone to thank each of you for coming here and spending your time. Here's what I jotted down. Big opportunity for our kids and our schools. More bandwidth. Figuring out how in a smart way to do the capital investment we need to do outside the schools, inside the schools. But also that the more bandwidth is necessary but not sufficient to unlock these opportunities. More data to help the FCC and also to help schools understand how they can be adopting better programs and spending money more efficiently. Use tech to help solve these problems. Really good ideas around the FCC creating sort of a data warehouse or someone creating a data warehouse. Put information, make it open and accessible to schools and others to help drive efficiency and smarter solutions. We heard wired and wireless, both. Licensed and unlicensed, both. We shouldn't reinvent the wheel here. We can't accept business as usual. And we need to have a sense of urgency. So those are my takeaways. Thank you all for participating in this great panel. Please join me in thanking our guests. Thank you. Thanks.